She never said thank you. Not once, not in the way people usually do. But on the morning she handed me a cashier's check for $400,000, and I handed it back to her. She looked at me the same way my daughter looks at me when I tuck her in at night, like I was the only solid thing in a room full of water. And I think that's the closest Vivienne Marchant ever got to saying what she felt. I need to back up because none of it makes sense without the beginning. And the beginning for me was a Wednesday in February, the kind of February that Ontario does when it really means it. The wind was coming off Lake Simcoe sideways, and I had my daughter Penny in the truck with me because her school had a PA day and my sister had canceled last minute. And so Penny was eating a granola bar in the passenger seat, wearing her purple snow boots, and asking me why clouds are white when snow is also white, and they're both water. She was 6. She asked questions like that constantly. I didn't always have good answers. That morning I told her it had something to do with how light bounces, and she seemed to accept that, which is one of the great mercies of being 6 years old. I was driving out to a property on the north end of Barrie, a job that had come through a guy named Pete from the Union Hall. Renovation work. A house that had been sitting empty for about 8 months, and the new owner wanted the main floor gutted and rebuilt before spring. I'd been doing this kind of work for 11 years by then. Framing, drywall, some tile, whatever needed doing. Nothing fancy. My name is not on any billboards. I drive a 2017 Ram with a dent in the rear quarter panel that I've been meaning to fix for 2 years. I make enough to keep the lights on, pay the mortgage on a small house in Innisfil, and put a little away for Penny's education fund every month. Some months more than others. I pulled up to the address and the first thing I noticed was that it was not what I'd been told to expect. Pete had said, a house. What I was looking at was a house the way a cathedral is a church. It sat back from the road behind a long paved driveway, and even under a foot of snow you could see it was something. Stone exterior, floor-to-ceiling windows across the entire front face. A 3-car garage off to the right that was larger than my entire house. I double-checked the address on my phone. Penny pressed her nose against the passenger window and said, quietly, the way kids say things when they're genuinely impressed, Dad, that is a very big house. It was. The contact was supposed to be a property manager, a man named Alon who had emailed me twice with specifications. But when I knocked on the side door, contractors don't use the front, you learn that early. It wasn't Alon who answered. It was a woman, maybe 55, wearing a gray cashmere sweater and holding a mug of tea with both hands, and she had the kind of face that made you feel like you had interrupted something important without meaning to. Not unfriendly, just contained. Like she had everything carefully arranged inside herself and she didn't particularly want it disturbed. She looked at me. She looked at Penny, who was standing slightly behind my leg holding the last bit of her granola bar. You must be the contractor, she said. Ray Kowalski, I said, and then caught myself. Sorry. I'm the sub. My name is Callum Briggs. Pete sent me. She nodded. I'm Vivienne. Come in. I found out later, in the way you find things out when you work on someone's house for 3 weeks, through conversations that happen sideways, through things you overhear, through the specific way a person talks about money, which is either with anxiety or without thinking about it at all, that Vivienne Marchant was the founder and recently retired CEO of a software company she had started in her late 20s, in a 2-bedroom apartment in Toronto. The company had been acquired 4 years ago for somewhere north of $800 million. I found this out not from her but from Alon, who mentioned it the way people mention things they assume everyone already knows. Vivienne herself never mentioned it. Not once. What she did mention, on that first morning, was the kitchen. She walked me through the main floor with the mug of tea still in her hands, pointing at walls and explaining what she wanted removed, what she wanted kept, what she'd already had the architect draw up. She knew exactly what she wanted. She was precise about it. She used words like sightline and load-bearing correctly, which not every client does, and it saved us about 20 minutes of back and forth. Penny followed behind us quietly. Vivienne didn't acknowledge her, but she also didn't ask her to wait in the truck, which I appreciated. At one point, Penny stopped in front of a large framed photograph on the wall near the dining room, a black and white image of a man standing next to a small single-engine plane, squinting into the sun, grinning so wide you could feel it through the photo. "Who is that?" Penny asked. I started to apologize, but Vivian spoke first, her voice completely even. That's my father, she said. He was a bush pilot. Penny thought about this for a moment. Did he fly you places? All the time, Vivian said. Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen and we moved on. I came back the next morning with my guys, just two of them. A young kid named Dev and an older fellow named Ronnie, who has been doing drywall longer than I've been alive and has opinions about it. And we started demo on the kitchen wall. It's loud work, dusty work. The kind of work where you put on your headphones and just go. Vivian stayed in the house the entire time, working from what I eventually understood was a home office on the second floor. She didn't hover. She didn't come down every 20 minutes to check on progress the way some clients do. The kind that make you slow down because you're explaining things constantly instead of doing them. She came down at noon the first day and set a box of sandwiches on the folding table we'd set up in the hallway. Turkey and Swiss from a deli in Barrie that I happen to know is not cheap. She said, I didn't know if anyone had allergies, and I said we were fine, and she said, good, and went back upstairs. That was the whole conversation. This went on for about a week and a half. We worked. She worked. The kitchen came apart and then slowly started coming back together. Dev and Ronnie left at 4:30 every day. I usually stayed an hour later, cleaning up the site, making notes, getting organized for the next morning. It's a habit. My ex-wife used to say I was better at organizing a job site than a household, and she wasn't entirely wrong about that. It was during one of those late afternoons, maybe 11 days in, that I heard it. I was in the kitchen checking measurements and Vivian was in the living room. I didn't know she'd come downstairs, and she had music on. Not loud, but a certain kind of quiet that has a shape to it. And then under the music I heard something else. I want to be careful about how I say this because it sounds intrusive, and it wasn't meant to be. But in an empty house, and a house under renovation is empty in a particular way, all the sound bouncing differently without the furniture to absorb it, you hear things you aren't supposed to hear. And what I heard was crying. The very quiet kind. The kind that's been practiced to be smaller than it wants to be. I made a point of making noise, dropped a tape measure, shifted some sheet goods. The kind of sounds that say I am here, I'm not trying to hear you. And after a couple of minutes I walked through the hall toward the front door and said, loudly enough, that I was heading out for the night. Vivian was sitting in the living room on the drop cloth we'd put down to protect the hardwood. Not in a chair. On the floor. She was holding something in her lap. A small cardboard box, the kind you get when someone's office effects are returned to the family. The kind with a lid and no logo. She looked up. I want to tell you she looked embarrassed. People usually do, but Vivienne Marchant didn't look embarrassed. She looked like someone who had been underwater for a very long time and had just this moment broken the surface. His things finally came, she said. I didn't know what that meant, not exactly. But I knew the shape of what she was saying. I said, I'm sorry, were you close? She looked at the box. He died in November, she said. He was 81. He'd been flying until he was 79, if you can believe that. Transport Canada finally made him stop. She paused. He did not take that well. I said something like, I bet he didn't. He came up here every summer, she said. This was his house first. He built most of it himself. He was that kind of man. She ran her thumb along the edge of the cardboard box. I've been renovating it because I couldn't stand to leave it the way it was, and I couldn't stand to sell it so. She looked up at me again. The specific look of someone telling you the truth when they're not sure why they're telling you. I'm sorry, I said again. I'll leave you to it. Sit down if you want, she said. I don't mean that in a needy way. I just mean, you don't have to rush out on my account. So I sat down on the drop cloth about 4 feet away from her, and for a few minutes we both just sat there in the half-demolished living room with the music on, and it wasn't awkward the way it should have been. It was just quiet. Eventually she opened the box. There were the usual things. A leather wallet, worn at the corners, a folded piece of paper that looked like a printed email, though I didn't look closely. A small wooden carving of a loon, the kind you find at roadside shops in northern Ontario, no bigger than a fist. A watch, and at the bottom of the box, underneath everything else, a key ring. It was the old-fashioned kind, not the fob style that most people have now. A flat piece of brass, shaped into the silhouette of a small plane. A beaver, I thought, or maybe a Cessna. It was worn enough to be ambiguous, with a chain through the nose of it. The metal had gone dull in the way metal does when it's been handled for a very long time. You could tell, just by looking at it, that someone's thumb had gone over that little plane 10,000 times. Vivienne held it up. He had this on his keys for 50 years, she said. My mother got it for him the year they met. There was a shop in Muskoka that made them, and she drove 45 minutes to go buy it, and he never once flew without it in his pocket. He said it was his good luck charm. She paused. He also said pilots who believe in good luck charms are the safest pilots in the sky, because they're the ones who aren't being cocky. I smiled at that. Sounds like my kind of guy, I said. She looked at the keychain in her palm for a long moment. Then she said something I've thought about many times since. I know it's irrational, but when I look at this house without all the things he put in it, it doesn't feel like it belongs to anyone yet, like it's just a structure, just walls. She closed her hand around the keychain, and I know the renovation is right. I know it can't stay a shrine, but I don't know how to make it feel like home without him in it. I didn't have a good answer for that. I'm a carpenter. I know how to make walls go up and come down. I don't know much about the other kind of structure. But I thought about what she'd said for the rest of the night. I thought about it the next morning when I got Penny up for school and made her oatmeal and listened to her tell me about a dream she'd had, about a horse that could do multiplication. I thought about it on the drive to the job site. I thought about it while I was putting in the new kitchen framing with Dev. And around 11 o'clock that morning, I stopped what I was doing and went to find Vivienne. She was in the kitchen doorway watching us work, holding her tea mug, which I had come to understand was a permanent accessory. I said, I want to ask you something and I need you to tell me if it's too much. She raised an eyebrow. The walls in the original part of the house, I said. The older wing, the section your father built, were you planning to change those too? She shook her head. I was going to leave those. That's the part that already feels like him. Right, I said. Then I want to show you something. I walked her to the far wall of the dining room, the one that had joined the older wing. I'd been noticing it for over a week. At about chest height, in a section partly hidden behind where a large cabinet had stood, there was a small mark in the plaster. Not damage, not wear. A mark that someone had made deliberately, with a pencil, at some point in the distant past. I'd seen it the first day and filed it away as one of those things you find in old houses. But now, I knelt down and looked at it properly, in the light from my work lamp, and I beckoned Vivienne over. She knelt beside me. The mark was a set of initials. RM, for Robert Marchant, I thought, though I didn't say it, and beside them, scratched very lightly into the plaster with what looked like a nail tip, was a tiny plane, 3 lines, the profile of a wing. Done quickly, done by hand, done by someone who must have made that shape 10,000 times in his mind. Vivienne was very still, I said. I almost plastered over it. I wanted to make sure you saw it first. She didn't say anything. She reached out and put 2 fingers against the marks in the plaster, very gently, the way you touch something you want to memorize. I left her there. That was Tuesday. On Thursday, Alain called me. He left a message that I listened to twice to make sure I'd understood it correctly. Vivienne Marchant was offering me a bonus on top of the contract. He didn't name a figure on the message but said she wanted to speak with me directly. I called him back and he told me the number. $400,000. He said it like he was confirming something routine, the way people do when large numbers have become ordinary in their world. I sat in my truck in the driveway of my house in Innisfil for a while after that call. Penny was at school. The truck was off. It was cold. I thought about what $400,000 would do. I thought about Penny's education fund. I thought about the dent in the rear quarter panel. I thought about my sister who had to cancel because her car needed work she couldn't afford. I thought about a lot of things. Then I went inside and I called Vivienne directly because Elaine had given me her number. She answered on the second ring. I said, I got your message. Or Elaine's message, I suppose. The one about the bonus. She said, yes. I said, can I ask what it's for? For the wall, she said. For stopping. I understood what she meant. She meant for not plastering over her father's mark. For noticing it at all. For bringing her to it before it disappeared, I said, I can't take that. There was a pause. She said, that's a strange response to $400,000. I know, I said, but I didn't do anything you would have wanted me to take money for. I just didn't destroy something by accident. That's the job. That's what showing up on time and paying attention is supposed to look like. Another pause. You have a daughter, she said. I do. Education is expensive. It is, I said. But she'll get there. We're working on it. I could hear Vivian thinking on the other end of the line. All right, she said finally. But I want to offer you something. You already paid the contract, I said. This is different, she said. My father had a workshop in the older wing. He built things in there, furniture, mostly. Cabinets. He made the kitchen table himself. I don't need the workshop, and I don't know what to do with the tools, and most of them are good tools. If you want them, they're yours. No strings. I didn't know what to say to that. A good woodworking shop accumulated over 50 years by a man who built his own house. That's not nothing. That's a life's work of equipment. The kind of thing that takes decades and a certain stubbornness to put together. I said, Are you sure? He would have liked you, she said. He was the same way about not taking things he hadn't earned. I went over the following Saturday with Penny. Vivian showed us to the workshop herself. She unlocked the door and then stepped back and let us go in ahead of her. And I stopped in the doorway for a second because of the smell of it. Sawdust and machine oil and something indefinable. That's just the smell of a workspace that's been used with love for a very long time. Penny walked in slowly with her eyes wide and went straight to the workbench and put her hands on it and looked at me. Dad, she said, which was all she needed to say. Vivienne stood in the doorway with her mug of tea. I looked back at her. The keychain, I said. The one from his box. Keep it on you. In your pocket or on your keys, whatever feels right. He carried it every day of his life. That's not a small thing to inherit. She looked at me. You sound like him, she said. I'm going to take that as a compliment. It was meant as one, she said. We spent about 2 hours in that workshop. Penny found a small unfinished wooden bird on the shelf near the window. Half-carved, abandoned mid-project, the shape of a loon just beginning to emerge from the block, and she held it for a long time without saying anything. On the way home, she kept it in her lap in the truck. At bedtime that night, I sat at the edge of her bed, and she was looking at the loon on her nightstand, and she said, Dad, do you think he was going to give it to someone? I said I didn't know. Maybe he just made it because he liked making it. Is that okay? She said. To make something and not give it to anyone? I said, yeah, I think that's okay. Sometimes you make something just to know you can, just to have made it. She thought about that. Okay, she said, and she went to sleep. The renovation finished in late March. On the last day, I walked through the house with Vivienne doing the final check, the way you always do, looking at every corner and joint and finish for anything that needs touching up. The kitchen was done. Clean lines, white oak lower cabinets, the sight lines she'd asked for, light coming in from the new window over the sink. She walked through it slowly and didn't say much, and when she got to the dining room and the wall where her father's mark was, which we had carefully preserved, masked off and painted around so it sat in its own small clearing in the new paint. She stopped and stood in front of it for a moment. She didn't say anything. But she put her hand into the pocket of her sweater, and through the fabric I could see the shape of something small. The little brass plane pressing against the cashmere. I know grief better than I'd like to. My own father has been gone 4 years, and there are still mornings where I reach for the phone before I remember. It lives in the small things, the way she said. The particular sound of someone's truck in the driveway. The smell of their coat. The way they always started a story with, well, here's the thing. What I know from my own grief and what I saw in Vivienne's is that you cannot renovate your way out of it. You can change the walls and the sight lines and the kitchen cabinets and the floor finish. And the house will be new, and it will be beautiful, and it will still be exactly the house where he isn't. That doesn't go away. What changes is just your relationship to the remaining evidence. The places where he pressed his hand against the wall and left a mark. The tools he used until they were part of his hands. The brass plane he rubbed his thumb over 50 years until the metal knew the shape of him. Those things don't fill the absence, but they hold the shape of it, and sometimes holding the shape is enough. I asked Vivienne once, near the end of the job, what she was going to do with the house, whether she'd live in it or rent it out or something else. She said, I'm going to live in it for the summer and see how that feels. I said that sounded right. He wanted me to have it, she said. Not as an asset, not as a thing to manage. He wanted me to actually be here. He said the trees around this property are the best trees in Ontario, and I've been arguing with him about that for 30 years. Are they? I said. She looked out the window at the birches along the back edge of the property, leafless still but with that particular silver gray that Ontario birches get in early spring, the color of almost there. Probably, she said, and almost smiled. I drove home with Penny asleep in the passenger seat, her head against the window, the half-carved loon tucked into her backpack where she'd started keeping it, the keychain that Vivienne had pressed into my hand at the door, not the brass plain, that one she kept, but a different one, a spare from Robert's shop key ring, a simple copper loop with no charm on it, that she said she wanted Penny to have, because Penny had asked good questions the day they met, was sitting on the dash in front of me, catching the last of the day's light. A man I never met left a mark on his own wall, in his own house, in a shape he must have drawn 1,000 times, and 53 years after he put it there, it stopped someone from covering it over. And that's the whole story, really. Most of the time we don't get to know which of the marks we leave are the ones that matter. We just have to trust that someone, somewhere, will stop long enough to look.